people to choose how they live as they age. AARP works to strengthen communities and advocate for what matters most, with a focus on health security, financial resilience, and social connection. Today's program focuses on recycling, which fits with our livable community agenda. Who's in the audience, Jacqueline? Who do you see in the chat?
Good morning. Today we have, as usual, a cross section of the nation. We have Peg from San Jose, and we have Kathy from Annapolis, Maryland.
Wow,
We
welcome.
I know, huh?
Mm-hmm.
We have Sophie, also from San Jose, and we have Lisa from Brooklyn, New York.
Wow, it really comes.
We have Jeannie from Vancouver, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Mark from Sunnyvale, and Larry from San Francisco, Joy.
Wow, thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank all of you for coming today. We are delighted to have all of you join us and hope today that you have your coffee, tea, or other beverages with you. Now, last year, we were pleased to provide a program around recycling, just one of the many ways that we can help our environment and our earth. The conversation could not be contained in 1 hour or even 2 hours, so we are so excited to continue our conversation on this topic. Now, to our viewers who may be watching from the outside of California, please note we will be referring some recycling practices and new laws here in California, which may not apply to your local community. Even within California, guidelines and practices might vary, so please be sure to check your local sanitation department's website. I'd like now to introduce our guest interviewer and our AARP volunteer, Vince King. Vince is joining us from Los Angeles this morning. Welcome, Vince.
Thanks so much, Joyce. I'm excited about today's conversation with Mark today. And, I do my best to recycle here in Los Angeles because I want to ensure that we don't overfill those landfills. Now, to get us warmed up today and help us get to know who is in the audience, we do have 2 poll questions, and we ask you to quickly submit your answers. So poll number 1, who in your household is the most passionate recycler? Is it you or your kids, your grandkids, your spouse, significant other, your roommate, or everyone in the house? Well, it looks like a lot of the people who logged in today are the people who are most passionate about recycling. So thank you all for answering that question. Now we have a second poll coming soon. All right, poll question number 2. Not quite yet. Make that magic happen. There it is, poll question number 2. So what makes recycling hard for you? You can choose any and all. Not knowing what to recycle, or I don't have an easy way to recycle. It's not hard for me, or other. And if you have an other, put it in the chat. So it looks like a bunch of people are saying they don't know what to recycle. And some people are saying, hey, it's not hard for me, that's great. And the others, a few of those. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing in those polls today. And we hope our program will leave you inspired to be the most passionate recycler in your household and get other people to do it too. And that we can address those obstacles that might be getting in your way to recycle. Now, how many times have you stopped and asked, is this recyclable while standing over your recycling bin? Especially when there seems to be so many different kinds of plastic. Here to help answer these questions is our special guest, recycling and waste management expert, Mark Bowers. Now, Mark managed the recycling and solid waste division for the city of Sunnyvale, California for 29 years before retiring. He started his local government career as Mountain View, California's first recycling coordinator, and prior to that worked for 12 years starting and operating community-based recycling nonprofits in Boulder, Colorado, Arcata, California, and Bend, Oregon. In retirement, he has continued to work on special projects related to the collection franchise and Sunnyvale's materials recycling and transfer station. That's a mouthful. So they affectionately know that as the SMART Station. Now, Mark earned a BS in Natural Resource Planning at Humboldt State University and has lived in Sunnyvale since 1987. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you, Vince. It's good to be back.
Great. Well, before we jump in, I want to note that a lot has happened over the past year in California as it relates to recycling. Let's take a quick look at a summary of those changes with this video from CalRecycle. CalRecycle is a Department of California state government dedicated to reduction, reuse, and recycling through education, recovery, and creating a circular economy.
91% of Californians are concerned about plastic and other trash overwhelming our neighborhoods and oceans. The solution to this trash pollution is to cut waste, recycle, and reuse more products and materials.
Innovation is what California does best.
California is taking steps to build the nation's first circular use economy. In 2022, lawmakers approved new laws and funding to design waste out of products and create new industries and green jobs by collecting, recycling, and remanufacturing more materials.
Instead of landfilling our waste, we can collect it and make it into new products.
Turning our trash into cash for our state, California set the nation's toughest rules to cut single-use plastics by requiring all packaging must be recyclable or compostable, and 65% must be recycled by 2032. Lawmakers also made the biggest reforms to the bottle bill in a decade, adding wine and liquor bottles into the system to provide needed material for new products, while adding redemption sites for more Californians. Legislators and Governor Newsom also passed new laws to recycle battery-embedded products like many cell phones, as well as the more than 822 million loose batteries used in California each year to prevent fires that cause millions in damages. They will instead be recycled for scarce raw materials like lithium for California-made products. Another new law will innovate fabric recycling to cut the 1.2 million tons of textiles dumped in landfills every year. Leading the nation in building a circular economy that mines our trash instead of our planet with endless raw materials for generations to come.
Wow, that's a lot of good change. So what's your reaction to the video, Mark?
That's a pretty good summary of what top issues are in California right now, and one they didn't emphasize, but that's a big one for most local governments and residents is organics, because if you weigh your trash and sort it out, in a typical home, a third of what's in the garbage is food scraps. People have a hard time believing that sometimes, but it's food scraps are so much denser than all the other garbage that it does weigh out as being a third of what you put in the trash on average. So that's a big focus of what's going on around the state.
Yeah, I know. I've been putting my food scraps in the compost bin starting, well, I think the law was last year. So that's great. Now, I appreciate your insight on this, Mark. So our program today will talk more extensively about plastic, but can we first start off with some general recycling tips?
Sure. In general, you have in almost all communities in California, and in fact, it's spreading throughout the country. I know we have participants from back east and other areas. Many local governments are now providing some level of recycling collection or drop-off centers for their residents and businesses. And you'll find that varies a lot locally based on the local markets, because the word that was used in the video was manufacturing. These products all need to go back to some sort of factory or reprocessing system to make them into usable consumer products. And those facilities are not evenly scattered throughout the country. So if you're sitting in the Great Basin, it's a long way to the nearest glass factory, for example. And so in some areas, you might find they don't accept glass, or they don't take this one material or another material because it's just too hard to get it to market. So, and the general statement would be, listen to your local trash hauler, your city, your county. They will be telling you what you should or should not put in the recycling container, and just listen to that advice and follow it.
That's great. Okay. So let's delve into plastic. So I appreciate all those guidelines and tips, and recycling does sometimes feel very puzzling, and I feel a little guilty when I throw away items in the trash when I can't figure out if they're recyclable. But let's focus on plastics. So without getting too technical, what's the plastic story?
Well, I suggested this plastics topic when we talked about pulling this presentation together, because after 40 plus years of trying to recycle plastics and being frustrated as an industry person in understanding the issues and trying to figure out why plastics are so much harder to interpret to residents than paper and metals and glass, I started to think about my experience and why that's different. And so there's some essential fundamental differences in how the plastics industry is structured that are very different from paper, metals, and aluminum, glass, that sort of popped out to me that plastics is special, and not in a good way. And so that's why we titled this The Cold Hard Truth About Plastics, that plastics are a real problem. They're complicated. And so I've got a presentation and some photos to try and illustrate some of these issues. So should we go ahead and jump into that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Okay, so we're up and viewing the screen. Everybody got that?
Yes, I can see it.
Good.
I can see it.
All right. So I'm going to use a few technical terms here just to make sure we're all on the same page. And so I'm defining them here at the start. I'm going to talk about what's an integrated industry, and that's an industry where the manufacturers use virgin products. And when I say virgin, I mean, say, trees instead of recycled paper, or iron ore instead of recycled steel. So they're using either or both to make their products, and they can switch back and forth. And these manufacturers will choose between those two based on price, quality, and availability. So if the recycling item becomes less expensive, they'll tweak things at the paper mill to use more recycled paper and less virgin wood waste. And I've got some examples of this. This is a paper mill using trees. You can see that pile of cut down trees in the foreground. And so paper mills can make paper from trees. And then if they decide to use recycled paper instead, and a lot of them do, these companies will invest very small amount of capital, tweak their incoming material stream to use recycled paper bales. This is all paper that's been collected and shipped to the mill and being made back into paper using that recycled resource instead of going out in the woods and cutting trees. So similarly, steel is a good example because a very high percentage of the steel products you buy are made from recycled steel. It's something that most people overlook, but a very high percentage of steel gets recycled, and it has a high recycled content, or they can make it from iron ore. Aluminum is similar to this. I didn't get any photos for aluminum, but very high percentage of aluminum that you purchase has recycled content because there's a lot of embedded value in the scrap aluminum. Glass is another good example because all glass bottles are made from is sand and soda ash. So the plants that make the glass bottles can switch back and forth and use varying percentages of recycled glass as opposed to going out and buying sand and soda ash to make their recipe. So these are all integrated industries. And so the way I put it in the slide here is that the recycling is in the DNA of these folks. somebody who's managing a glass plant or a paper mill or a steel mill, they know about recycling. It's part of their skill set. And then they, as I said earlier, choose to go with the virgin or the recycled materials at any given point in time based on the cost of them, supply reliability, and quality. So then we get to plastics. And so the essential issue with plastics that I sort of dawned on me in the last few years is plastics is different because the plastics industry is not integrated. And by that, I mean that the people that make the plastic products that you get in water bottles or plastic cups are only making those materials from virgin resources, fossil, oil, and natural gas. In the US, a great percentage of the plastics are made from natural gas. Other countries, they use more of the heavier crude oil derived products. Okay, these companies, and they're big familiar names in the petrochemical industry, do not recycle. They're not set up to, they don't really have any interest in it because recycling competes with their sale of these virgin derived products. So that's what I mean by there's no recycling DNA in the virgin plastics industry. There are plastics recyclers, but they are completely separate from the big petrochemical plants and industries that make most of the plastics that we use and get. So I wanted to, this is a shout out to Bailey Hall from Sunnyvale staff, who is in the picture here, who helped me pull some of these photos together. So yay, Bailey, thank you. So these are bales of plastic beverage bottles, number 1, polyethylene terephthalate. And so the big Dow Chemical type of virgin plastics producers does not buy these, does not recycle them, and really doesn't have any interest in their heart of hearts in seeing that happens, because they'd rather sell you the stuff that they make. So again, plastics is not integrated in the way that paper and glass and metals are. And then the other interesting thing is if you get below the surface, the plastics manufacturers are represented by large, well-funded, well-organized, very polished lobbying organizations that work with the Congress and with state legislators to cement the little numbers on the bottoms of the plastic bottles. They passed laws over the past few decades in many states that require those to be used, even though they're very complicated and don't fully explain what's recyclable and what's not. But they give the greenwash impression that all of these plastic items with the little numbers on the bottom are recyclable, and they just aren't. So that's what we're digging into a little bit here. So these are some I've done lobbying at the state level in a couple of states, and I am impressed on a technical level with the skill and polish that the industry groups use. They hire the best lobbyists. They do research on what are people's emotional hot buttons around recycling and cleanliness, germs and things like that, and then use those messages and themes to really push the idea that somehow virgin plastics are superior to recycled items or reused items. We saw a lot of this back in the 2013 era in California when we were passing plastic bag bans. There's some fairly interesting messaging coming out from the people that opposed the plastic bag ordinances and the state law that was eventually passed, pushing people's emotional hot buttons, like I said, on issues like cleanliness and implying that we're all going to die if we use recycled or reused grocery bags, for example. They're just going after people's fears of germs and so forth. So there's literally and figuratively greenwashing that's going on here by both the people that make the plastics and people that use the plastics, the virgin plastics. And so greenwashing is a term we use a lot as a sort of an attempt to cover over the environmental sins that are being committed by the flooding of the market with these fossil fuel derived items. So I have a bag of shame, a big bag of shame. I have it sitting here next to me. And so I decided to take a few pictures last week and show you some examples if you get right down and dirty with the labeling on some of these products. This is a cup that I picked up in a hotel where they have those lobby breakfast bars. And so this one's made with renewable resources. And we'll get to what that is in the next photo. It's literally green and has the word eco there. And if we look on the bottom, you see the chasing arrow symbol. Now that is supposed to mean that this cup is recyclable, and it's the number 7. Well, number 7 in the coding, there's 1 through 7. Number 7 is everything else, anything that doesn't fit into numbers 1 through 6. And then PLA stands for polylactic acid. So it says that this was made not with virgin materials, but with plant-derived materials. But that it's recyclable. And then if you look on the right side, it's a little tough to pick it out, but the word compostable there, where the cup is laying sideways, if you can make that out. So they're saying this cup is both recyclable and compostable. And I can tell you that from an industry perspective, that is impossible. A composter does not want a recyclable cup in their compost raw materials. A recycler does not want to try to recycle something that's compostable because it'll compost in their finished product and make it not usable. So that right there is what we would call a less than sincere pair of messages. There's some harsher words you could use, but we're supposed to keep things nice on the AARP call. So I won't say anything like they would be lying or anything harsh like that. So that's a good example. And I've seen this on drinking water bottles where it says simultaneously it's recyclable and it's compostable. It just can't happen. I've got some more positive photos here or comparisons. In the left-hand photo, these are 2 berry baskets. The number is hard to read on the clear plastic one, but that's your typical number 1 PETE. Now, there's an important and very complicated message about number 1s. These berry baskets, there's little to no market demand for what we call the thermoform plastics. These guys are fairly rigid, to hold the berry basket shape, and they are not recyclable in the same way that a number 1 drinking water bottle or soda bottle is. So that's the real problem container. A lot of people will see that number 1 and put it in their recycling cart because they know the number 1 bottles are accepted, but that's not the case here. You don't want to be putting these or the big salad containers, those we call them thermoforms or rigid number 1s. They're made from the same polymer, but they're made in different ways, where this one takes a rigid form that's very difficult to recycle. Plus it's got this adhesive label on it, and the adhesive is a problem and the paper is a problem. On the right is something I picked up, I've seen in a couple of stores, is more or less a cardboard berry basket. Works just fine, and that is very easy to recycle in your recycling cart. It's just paper. So that is something you want to look for in the store to try and avoid the plastic ones. The jug on the right, this is a milk jug. And to get a little technical, this is natural. It has no pigment added to it. And that's one of the most valuable plastic items out there. It's a number 2, if you were to look on the bottom, high density polyethylene. So it's fairly easy to market that item as it is the number 1 soda bottles. And that's typically something that you can put in your cart in most recycling programs. Here is another interesting one, and a large company that ships stuff to you next day or a couple of day delivery has for a long time been using these plastic envelopes on the left side. And they say they're recyclable in some areas. The problem is, if you look on the upper left, there's a paper label stuck to this, and it's not acceptable for recycling with the paper label on it, but they don't make that clear. You would have to take a pair of scissors and cut that label off, and then you'd be taking this to maybe a supermarket drop-off point, because this is film plastic that most recycling programs don't want to accept. So Amazon has, to their credit, looked really hard. They had a team come through our smart station and watch how the materials moved through the system and got sorted, and noticed that these flat envelopes end up in the wrong place. They end up in the paper because they're flat. And that's the way the sorting machines work stuff, is they sort the flat stuff separate from the three-dimensional round stuff. So they've been moving towards the item on the right, which is just like a brown paper bag or a cardboard box. It's that same craft material, we call it KRAFT. And that is very easily recycled. The paper mills can handle the plastic label because they use a water-based process, and those labels will come off. So we've seen Amazon make some commitments to moving away from the problematic plastic envelopes and towards these brown things. So that leads to, how can we make more of this happen? And what's a consumer to do? So here we see some suggestions. And one is my personal suggestion: be skeptical of these green claims. Don't take them at face value. Be cynical. And I know that most recyclers are very positive outlook people, and it's a little hard to accept the fact that you have to think about the fact that people may not be telling you all the truth all the way through. But be skeptical of the green claims. Think hard about whether what you're hearing makes sense, because oftentimes it doesn't. Also, this is a tricky one. Your city or county or your hauler may simplify some of these messages. And so be prepared to read those messages about what does and doesn't go in the cart, to see if they're just trying to keep you from being overwhelmed with detail, or are they really telling you the truth? And for instance, in Sunnyvale, we've been very explicit that we don't want the berry baskets. We don't want these other things. We want just the specific things for which we can truly market your materials and get them back into the economy as new products. And what's interesting is that residents often react with hostility towards that, because they say, well, city X, Y, or Z says put all the recyclable, all the plastics in the cart. And what they don't understand is that a lot of these unacceptable materials are being sorted out and sent to the landfill anyway. And so residents have trouble sorting through the complicated messages or the detail, and want to be optimistic and do what we call wish cycling, which is throwing stuff in the cart that really shouldn't go there. So be aware that that could be behind what you're hearing from your jurisdiction, is trying to not overwhelm you with the detail in order to just get the good stuff in the cart along with a bunch of bad stuff. And then they will work behind the scenes to sort it out. When you're out, let's say, getting takeout food, be thinking in advance as you place orders, and say, I don't want utensils. I don't want straws. I don't want napkins. I don't want the condiment packages if it's something you're not going to use. California's now got a law that's been in place just about a year, where restaurants are not allowed to give you utensils and condiments if you don't explicitly ask for them. Not all the restaurants are on board with that yet, but be aware there is a state law out there that's being enforced at the county level that pushes back against the tendency of the restaurants to just throw a set of utensils in your takeout bag, even though you might just throw them in your drawer at home that has like 2,000 of them. And another way to deal with that is to carry an urban mess kit if you're eating on the run. I have friends who wrap a napkin and a spork and say a metal straw and carry it around with them, and use that to avoid taking the single-use stuff. The next point is, it's good. You have power as a consumer. You can make change simply by feeding back to manufacturers, grocers, and restaurants positive and negative feedback on what you're getting from them. For example, if you buy a coffee maker, it comes in a box, and the glass carafe is cushioned with, say, corrugated cardboard that's specially fit to do that, and you see this more and more, that's a very positive move. You can recycle that corrugated cardboard packing material in your recycling cart, no problem. Old school method, some manufacturers are still using the styrofoam packing, which is messy, and there is no market for that material. And so going to the manufacturer after you bought a product and email their folks or call their 800 number and say, hey, I was really happy to get this coffee maker with cardboard packaging. So I think you guys are doing a great job. They will really value that kind of response, and it makes them place that as a higher priority as they're designing their product packaging. The restaurants, you can thank them for asking you if you want utensils, and they'll know that the customers are paying attention, and so on. And then the final one would be, if you're up for it, you can track legislation, write your elected officials, call them, and participate in grassroots lobbying to identify problems and support solutions. So that's the message I was trying to get across there. And going back to the beginning, plastics are different because the industry is structured different, and the folks who are producing all these plastics from virgin materials really don't care if you recycle. I know that sounds harsh, but they're into the money and they like their business model. They like pulling the oil and natural gas out and turning it into products and then walking away and letting somebody else deal with it. And that shouldn't be allowed to continue long term. So.
Wow, Mark, that's a lot of great information, a lot I didn't know about. And it's crazy. I've always wondered about those plastics, especially all the different numbers on the bottoms, and trying to figure out, well, is this really recyclable or not? And that was very helpful for you to educate us about that. So let's go over to the chat and see what kind of questions people have. Jacqueline, what questions do you see for Mark?
Well, as always, this is an interesting topic. It's for commentary for Kathleen. It says, it seems products from outside the U.S. have clear labels indicating what is recyclable and what is not. Unfortunately, I don't see those clear labels on a lot of other packaging. Can you speak to that a little bit, Mark?
That's a good question. Would you be talking about something from the European Union, perhaps? Because I know they have a lot of consumer-related laws in the EU that are
Sounds
more
like it.
advanced
Yeah, just as
than
outside
the
the
United
US.
States.
Yeah.
That's probably result that the EU has passed a lot of laws and regulations that really address these problems, and the United States has been scrambling to catch up in a lot of cases.
Okay. Cheryl says she bought a Lomi, excuse me, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, for Mother's Day. It solves the food scrap problem. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is? Do you know what that is?
A Lomi?
Lomi.
I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to take a wild guess that maybe it's something that dehydrates your food scraps. And I know that there have been folks doing that. Lomi. Okay, so we'll assume that, and even if I'm not right, it's a good question to address. There's nothing wrong with dehydrating your food scraps. It makes them lighter and easier to work with, and they don't smell as much. Some people think that what they get at the end of the product process is compost, but it's not compost. It's dry food scraps. So if you want to compost it, you need to still put it in a compost pile or send it off to your local jurisdiction's composting program, or however they handle food scraps. You have to think about the fact if it plugs into the wall for power, you're generating some greenhouse gas emissions possibly from the power that's consumed. I've seen this done on an industrial level. Some of the big tech companies were doing this with some really mistaken large scale. I mean, really big ones. With some notions that were not technically founded well, thinking they were producing large amounts of compost. And again, what they were producing was dry food scraps, and burning a lot of power to turn the device. Mm-hmm. I apologize if I'm misunderstanding the question, but I think that's what we're talking about.
Okay. You spoke to this a little bit, but can you quickly re-summarize, what does greenwash mean?
Greenwashing is deceptively or using deceptive messaging to give the impression that your company or your product is more environmentally friendly than it actually is. That's probably the most concise description.
Okay. What can consumers do to advocate for change when foods are delivered in unrecyclable material? That's a good question.
That is a really good question, and I don't have a particularly good answer except to provide feedback to the delivery service that you would like to see them using something that's more beneficial. Most of the takeout containers, this was exacerbated by COVID when so much food started being taken out of restaurants as opposed to eating in. There are some efforts that are being made to I don't know quite how to describe them, putting deposits on standardized takeout containers. And some cities like Portland, Oregon, and others are working with some of the food delivery folks to use a standardized reusable container that would go back to a central washing spot and then get reused over and over. Also similar to that are beverage cups for some of the large concert venues and festivals, where there's some success being found where you pay a deposit when you arrive and you issued your beer cup, let's say, and then the beer cup has a scanning code on it. It's a durable container that the idea is that when you leave, you deposit it at a certain point, you get back your deposit through an app onto your credit card. And then the organizers are working with the people that provide the beer cups, and they go back again to a central kitchen where they're going to get washed and then used at some other type of facility. Those are finding some success, I think, in the larger festivals. But it is a difficult thing, particularly with food takeout that's so geographically distributed and has so many different food providers. But that is a solution to work towards, is the standardized reusable containers that come with some sort of deposit.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Okay, you can tell it's been a while since I've been to a festival. How many times can plastic be recycled?
I'm sorry, I lost the...
How many times can plastic be recycled?
I would say in the real world, not too many times. Often what you see with plastics recycling is it's not bottle to bottle, for example. It's going to a somewhat less premium use the second time around. The bottles may turn into a fleece jacket, and then the fleece jacket's kind of a dead end. It's hard to recycle that. So I'd say once is typical. It's very different from place to place, though. If you ask that same question about paper, you can recycle paper over and over, not 100% again. The paper fibers get shorter, and so your yield might not be 100%, but you might get back, say, 95% of the paper as a usable thing. The metals are pretty high, steel, aluminum, copper, pretty high recovery rates because metal is metal, and you don't really have any loss in the processes to speak of. Plastics are less so, and the pathways that they travel through are less premium pathways than the virgin materials.
You showed us the Amazon packaging earlier. Are you saying that we should remove labels and lids from our recyclables ourselves?
From your recyclables, the general rule for lids, if you're talking about glass or bottles and jars of any type, would be take the lids off. And the main reason I say that is that people leave the liquids in. The liquids are more of a problem than the lids.
Mm-hmm.
We have a real mess in our processing facilities where people will give you a Pepsi bottle that's 80% full of Pepsi, or a motor oil bottle that has motor oil in it. So if you take the lid off, you're more aware of the fact that you don't want to make a mess in your own space, so you'll make sure that bottle's empty. The lids, depending on the local processor, you may be told to leave them on or take them off. The default would be to take them off. In the case of the metal lids, let's say an apple juice jar, glass jar with a metal lid, you can take that metal lid and put it loose in your cart, because that's going to get caught by a magnet and go get recycled as a tin can or steel scrap. Don't leave it fastened to the glass, because then it goes into a waste pile, because you've got the glass and the steel fastened together. So take those lids off the glass bottles and jars, and they can get picked up oftentimes and recycled as steel.
Good to know. Okay. One person, they have a concern about the heavy plastic grocery bags. Why are these allowed in California under the plastic bag law?
That is a really good question. So you have to get into the Wayback Machine a little bit for that answer as to why they're allowed. That was part of the legislative sausage making, was to get the law passed. They had to get on board the manufacturers of those bags to neutralize their opposition to just flatly banning all plastic bags. So that's why they're allowed. What is emerging now, and this is a top priority in Sacramento for groups like Californians Against Waste, is those, quote, reusable plastic bags are not being reused. You're seeing them turn up in the garbage. People just don't take them back to the store and reuse them, and they're not particularly desirable in a recycling cart, and so a lot of them are going to landfill. Now, the plastic bag ban has done a great job of eliminating hundreds of millions of those single-use plastic bags coming out of groceries. I mean, if you remember how things used to work, if you walked into the supermarket and bought a candy bar, the checkout clerk would drop your candy bar into this great big single-use plastic bag. You'd walk out to, I don't need this plastic bag. You'd throw it away and eat the candy bar. So there was this reflex at the checkout counter that was just flooding the world with those flimsy single-use bags. And that has stopped. That's been a great, great improvement, both in terms of litter, resource use, and general cleanliness of the environment. But you do still have stores sending out these heavy bags that aren't seeing much of an end-of-life benefit or producing much of an end-of-life benefit. So there is an impulse in Sacramento right now to pass some follow-up legislation that takes on that topic. And so you could watch with groups like Californians Against Waste and support those efforts, maybe not in the next year, but probably the session that comes after that. I would think we're going to see some legislation on that.
Thank you. Can you explain, and you touched on this briefly, can you explain what the numbers 1 through 7 mean on plastics packaging? I know. Do these numbers mean that something is not recyclable? You knew that was coming.
Okay. I remember I mentioned that the industry group got many, many states to mandate these numbers with the chasing arrows symbol on the bottoms of containers. California figured out that was a trick and has actually changed the law in California to say they cannot use the recycling symbol unless they're actually recycled commonly. So that we're seeing a change in California on that. Now they still can put a triangle around it, a triangle around the number, but it can't include the little arrows that indicate recycling. So with that preamble, let me see if I can quickly tell you. Number 1 is polyethylene terephthalate. And for bottles, that is a good indication that bottle is recyclable. But again, there are number 1 thermosets or thermoforms like the berry baskets and a lot of other products that have a particular rigid shape. Those are not desirable, and I would not put those in your recycling cart. The number 2s are similarly mostly recyclable bottles, and a lot of people forget about number 2 bottles like shampoo bottles, laundry detergent bottles. All of those with the number 2, those are good and can go into your recycling cart pretty much. Milk jugs, those are great. Number 3 is something that no one wants, and that's polyvinyl chloride. It's a poisonous, toxic chemical that pretty much, it's a clear bottle that used to be used for larger liquor bottles and pretty much isn't anymore. But the number 3 is just a bad one that nobody wants. Don't put that in the cart. Number 4 is low density polyethylene, which is like plastic bags and other more flexible things, generally not desirable in a recycling cart. Number 5 is polypropylene, which There are, in some parts of the country, there is some demand for the number 5 polypropylene, like your yogurt tubs and things like that. It's not very common, though, to see those. And this is where I am guilty of some wish cycling. Sometimes I just go, somebody ought to want this thing, and I'll throw a number 5 in my recycling cart, and then my wife chews me out. And, yeah, there we go. Number 6 is similar to number 3. Number 6 is polystyrene. Generally not a market for that material. These are often things like beer cups and the little plastic wine, the sort of rigid wine cups like they give you on the airline. A lot of those are number 6s. And then number 7 is everything else. So you can't really say much about number 7 because it's a dog's breakfast. And generally you don't want to see a number 7 going into your recycling cart. So number 1s and number 2s, if they're bottles, that's the golden stuff.
So for our last question, and you touched on this very briefly, are toothpaste tubes and shampoo bottles recyclable?
Shampoo bottles, like I said, are generally number 2s, and you can toss those in the recycling cart. Toothpaste tubes, I find people obsessing about toothpaste tubes. I mean, I understand that. I'm a little OCD myself. I have a really hardcore recycler here in Sunnyvale who collects his toothpaste tubes and mails them to an outfit on the East Coast that promises it's doing something with them. And I balk at that just in the thermodynamics of mailing something from here to the East Coast and the amount of energy it's required to transport something 3,000 miles that's of really low value. To me, that just kind of is a non-starter. I really like this guy. He's come up with some great solutions locally, but that's maybe a bridge too far. So I do throw my toothpaste tubes away. I think there's some niche toothpaste products that you can get in some of the very specialized stores that specialize in refilling. So I don't want to make a blanket statement that it just can't happen, but for the mass market brands of toothpaste, those pretty much have nowhere to go but in the garbage. They're a laminate of a whole bunch of different kinds of plastic, and generally have a residue inside them for the toothpaste that doesn't get squeezed out. Would make them very difficult to reprocess.
All right, so I have
a lot of questions. So back to you, Vic.
Yeah, I have my own personal question. I think it came up in the chat, and Jacqueline, you didn't get to it, but I'm going to sneak this one in before we close out. So Mark, how much do we need to wash our plastics before we toss them in that recycling bin? So you mentioned the shampoo bottle or, a takeaway container. How much do we need to actually wash those before we put them in recycling?
I would say it really depends on the product. Now, peanut butter is probably a good extreme example that there's such slim energy economics on recycling plastics that to really get a peanut butter jar clean would probably take more energy and natural resources in the form of detergent than you're going to capture recycling it. I deal with this by buying my peanut butter in glass jars because contamination is a lot less of an issue with glass recycling. They're taking that glass product to 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and boom, that peanut butter is gone and not a problem. Plastics can't be recycled at those high temperatures because they would just catch on fire. So they do need to be cleaner than some of the other recyclables is probably the main statement. I give everything just a minimal rinse, soda, things like that. Shampoo, I don't think is a particularly difficult thing, but I'd give it a little, tablespoon of water and a rinse and dump it out and probably call it good.
Got it. Okay. And do we need to scrape those paper labels off of the plastic bottles before they get recycled?
No. If anybody's recycling those products, they have developed a method for dealing with that particular type of contaminant.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's always so wonderful to learn about recycling and what we can do to help the environment. So sending the mic back to you, Joyce.
Thank you. That was absolutely phenomenal. Boy, thank you, Vincent and Mark. I've learned so much. But before we close out, we'd like to take a quick pulse on what we've learned. So please put in the chat, what did you learn from today's presentation? Jacqueline, read some of the things that people are putting in the chat for me, please. Oh, I can't hear you, Jacqueline.
We learned about the need to wash off items before we put them in the recycler. Somebody learned. We learned about tearing off or getting rid of labels and things on our paper and plastic if possible.
I'm sure they have a lot of things that they'd like to put in there. It's probably still processing that all in their heads right now.
And especially about the how to do the waste, the trash, the composting versus the recycling in the recycling bin.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. It sounds like we've learned a lot from what Mark has given us today. Thank you, Vince and Mark. I learned so much. So please let us know how you're doing by filling out our survey, and the link will be placed in the chat. We would like to invite you to our quarterly series, Piggy Bank Essentials with Martin, October the 26th at 9 a.m. We will be continuing our conversation on the basics of estate planning. And also join us for our next Tea and Coffee Tuesday monthly meeting on Tuesday, November the 14th at 9 a.m. And if you'd like to see today's program or other past Tea and Coffee Tuesday programs, please check out on our AARPCA YouTube website. Yes, we have a website, and the link is placed in our chat. Again, a big thank you to our guest, Mark Bauer, and our AARP volunteer, Vince King, our Tea and Coffee Tuesday crew, Jacqueline, Connie, and Sarita, our AARP staff, and you. Again, I'm your host, Joyce Howard, and this concludes today's program. You may now exit the Zoom room meeting, and in a few minutes, you will automatically be placed back into our waiting room. Again, thank you for coming. And this ends our program. Have a great day.
They keep coming back in like last week.
I was getting ready to ask you that. What is happening?
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to end the meeting.
Yeah, they keep coming. We put them in and then they come back in again. You're right. I'm seeing that. Okay.